My name is Liam, and for as long as I can remember, my hands have been my voice. They speak in the language of wood grain, in the silent conversations between a chisel and a piece of stubborn oak. I'm a furniture restorer, a craftsman. I live in Port Blossom, a city that feels suspended in time, where the salt-laced wind from the Atlantic whispers through the branches of ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss, and the cobblestone streets of the historic district echo with stories. My workshop, a converted carriage house behind a modest rental, is my sanctuary. The air inside is thick with the sweet, earthy scent of sawdust and linseed oil, a perfume I prefer to any cologne. It is a place of quiet concentration, where the frantic pace of the modern world fades away, and the only rhythm is the steady scrape of a hand plane or the gentle tap of a mallet. It is where I feel most myself. For 3 years, I had tried to share that self with Chloe. We met on a warm autumn evening at a gallery opening. She stood illuminated by a track light, a glass of white wine in her hand, talking animatedly about the artist's use of negative space. She worked in public relations, a world as foreign to me as mine was to her, a world of press releases, brand synergy, and networking events. She was sharp, luminous, and possessed an energy that both captivated and intimidated me. Our first few months were a whirlwind of discovery, a beautiful collision of 2 different orbits. I would show her the intricate dovetail joints on a 19th-century chest, and she would explain the subtle genius of a viral marketing campaign. We moved in together after a year and a half, settling into a charming apartment with high ceilings and wide plank floors in a neighborhood that was caught between the old world and the new. Our life was a tapestry woven with 2 distinct threads. My thread was quiet, textured, and colored in earthy tones. Hers was bright, fast, and shot through with metallic sheen. For a long time, the contrast was beautiful. But there was another thread, a tangled, abrasive knot that ran through her side of the pattern: her friends. Isabel, Sophia, and Maya. They had been Chloe's steadfast companions since their university days, a tightly knit trio that moved through the world with a shared sense of purpose and judgment. Isabel, a financial analyst with a razor-sharp tongue, saw the world as a series of assets and liabilities. Sophia, who worked in fashion merchandising, was a mirror, reflecting and amplifying the opinions of the other 2. And Maya, whose family money funded a life of curated leisure, was the self-appointed arbiter of taste. From the beginning, I was a curiosity to them, a rustic novelty. Their remarks started as what Chloe called gentle teasing. They were small, like splinters, easy to ignore at first, but irritating under the skin. They'd comment on the sawdust I inevitably tracked into the apartment, calling it my man glitter. They'd ask if my clients ever paid me in chickens or handmade quilts. My passion for restoring old, forgotten things was, in their eyes, a quaint but ultimately pointless hobby. "It's sweet that you like old things, Liam," Isabel once said, looking at a beautifully revived rocking chair, "but don't you ever want something new?" I would try to explain the soul of a piece, the history held within its scratches and dents, the satisfaction of giving it a second life. They would listen with polite, vacant smiles. I was a different species, a creature from a slower, less ambitious ecosystem. I brushed it off because Chloe would laugh it off. Later, in the quiet of our apartment, she would wrap her arms around me and whisper, "Don't mind them. That's just how they are. They don't mean anything by it." And for 3 years, I believed her. I chose to believe her because I loved the woman she was when they weren't around. Tonight was meant to be a celebration. Chloe had been promoted to senior account executive at Vivid PR, a significant step in her career. I was genuinely, deeply proud of her. I saw how hard she worked, the late nights she poured into her projects. I wanted to do something special, something that spoke her language. I booked a table at Ember and Ash, one of the city's most lauded new restaurants, a place of minimalist decor, theatrical lighting, and a menu where the descriptions of the food were longer than the ingredient lists. I told her it was my treat for the whole table. I wanted to honor her success in a way I thought she would appreciate. The evening began with a hopeful hum. The restaurant was buzzing with the low thrum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. We were seated at a round table near a large window overlooking the lamplit street. The city lights cast a warm glow on Chloe's face, and she looked radiant. For a while, it was perfect. We ordered a bottle of expensive champagne, and I raised my glass to her. To Chloe, I said, my voice filled with sincere admiration. Senior account executive. You earned every bit of this. She beamed, and her friends echoed the toast. The appetizers arrived, a deconstructed Caesar salad, and something with foam and edible flowers. The conversation was light. Then, as the waiter cleared the plates, Isabel leaned forward, her smile thin. So, Liam, she began, her voice carrying a familiar edge of condescension. Still spending your days covered in dust? It must be so relaxing to have such a physical job. Not much boardroom stress, I imagine. I felt the familiar, dull prickle of annoyance, but kept my expression neutral. There's a different kind of problem-solving involved, I said gently. It requires a lot of patience and precision. Oh, I'm sure, Sophia chimed in, swirling the champagne in her glass. But it's not exactly a career with an upward trajectory, is it? I mean, Chloe is climbing the corporate ladder and you're sanding it. She laughed, a short, sharp sound. Maya, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up. Chloe, sweetie, do you remember that guy from the tech summit? The one who founded that app? Now he was going places. He probably doesn't have calluses on his hands. I looked across the table at Chloe. She was smiling, a tight, practiced smile, shaking her head as if to say, "Oh, you guys are incorrigible." She didn't say a word in my defense. Not a single one. My own smile began to feel like a mask I was holding in place with trembling hands. The main courses arrived, magnificent creations of steak and artfully arranged vegetables. But the taste had turned to ash in my mouth. The verbal jabs continued, a relentless, carefully aimed barrage. They joked about the old, reliable truck I drove, comparing it to Isabel's new German sedan. They questioned the financial viability of my business, wondering aloud if it was more of a charity case that Chloe was generously supporting. Isabel even had the audacity to say, "You're lucky, Liam." Chloe is what we call dating with a social conscience. It's very philanthropic of her. With each comment, I felt a piece of myself quietly closing off. I was building a wall inside, brick by invisible brick. I tried to catch Chloe's eye, to send a silent plea, but she avoided my gaze, focusing instead on cutting her filet mignon into impossibly small pieces. The final, decisive blow came from Sophia. "Honestly, Chloe," she said, leaning in conspiratorially, though her voice was loud enough for the whole table to hear. "When are you going to get serious? Liam is a nice guy, but you're destined for the penthouse suite, and he's workshop material." I carefully placed my knife and fork on my plate, the silver making a soft click against the porcelain. The sound seemed to break the spell. Chloe finally looked at me, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She sighed, a long, weary sound, as if I were the one creating a problem. "Liam," she said, her voice low and strained. "They're just having fun. It's how they are." "It doesn't feel like fun, Chloe," I said, my own voice quieter than I intended, yet it seemed to carry across the suddenly silent table. "Oh, for God's sake, don't be so sensitive," Maya scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Are you going to start crying because we made a few little jokes?" I took a deep breath, focusing on the flame of the candle in the center of the table. "I'm just not comfortable with being the punchline for the entire evening." That's when Chloe said it. She looked at me, her expression hard, her patience gone. The woman I loved, the woman whose victory I was there to celebrate, looked me dead in the eye and delivered the line that would change everything. "Look," she said, her voice cold and clear. "If you don't like my friend's rude jokes, you can just pay and leave." The air crackled. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant roar. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a small giggle escaped from Isabel, a sound of pure triumph. Chloe had chosen. I felt a strange, unexpected calm settle over me. It was the calm of a long-overdue decision finally being made for you. "Thanks for the option," I said, my voice steady. I pushed my chair back and stood up. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my wallet. I did a quick mental calculation, my stake, my one glass of wine, a generous tip for the waiter who had done nothing wrong. I laid $80 in cash on the table. "This should cover my portion," I said. Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief. "Liam, sit down. Don't be so dramatic." I picked up my keys from the table. "Enjoy your celebration dinner," I said, my gaze sweeping over the three of them and, finally, resting on her. "You deserve it." As I turned and walked away, the silence was broken by laughter. I heard Sophia say with confident amusement, "He'll be back in 5 minutes. Just watch." But I didn't go back. I walked past the host stand, pushed open the heavy glass door, and stepped out into the cool night air. The city sounds rushed back in, the distant siren, the murmur of pedestrians, the rustle of leaves in the planters that lined the street. I walked to my truck, the solid, reliable machine they so often mocked, and climbed inside. I sat there for a long time, the engine off, just breathing. My phone, lying face down on the passenger seat, remained dark. 10 minutes later, it lit up and the vibrations began. The first text from Chloe. "That was very funny. Now come back and pay the bill like you promised." A few minutes later, "Liam, this isn't cute anymore. You're embarrassing me." And then, "Are you serious right now?" I started the engine. The familiar, low rumble was the most comforting sound I had heard all night. I pulled away from the curb and drove home, not to our home, but towards the first step of whatever came next. I was done being the punchline. I was done paying for experiences that cost me my self-respect. Sleep was a shallow, restless sea that I couldn't quite sink into. After leaving the restaurant, I had driven aimlessly through the quiet, sleeping streets of Port Blossom before finally ending up at the one place that felt like a safe harbor, David's garage. David has been my friend since I first moved to the city. He's a mechanic, a man who understands the logic of engines and the value of honest work. His garage, smelling of grease and coffee, was my workshop's gruffer, louder cousin. I crashed on the worn leather sofa in his small office, using a clean shop rag as a pillow. The digital assault from Chloe and her friends continued throughout the night. It was a multi-front attack of texts, missed calls, and voicemails. "Chloe, I cannot believe you would humiliate me like that. My friends think you are a pathetic, spineless child. Chloe, you left me with a $650 bill, Liam. $650. This is the most embarrassing night of my life. You need to send me the money right now. Chloe, answer your phone." Around 2 in the morning, her friends joined the fray. It was as if they had convened a war council. Isabel sent a long, rambling paragraph accusing me of financial manipulation, claiming I had lured them into a false sense of security with my offer to pay, only to abandon them. It was, she concluded, a classic move of a man with a fragile ego. Sophia called me a petty, classless loser. Maya, in a stroke of what she must have considered genius, sent me a Venmo request for $150 with a note, for emotional damages and my Uber home. I lay there in the dark, the phone glowing in my hand, and felt a profound sense of detachment. It was like watching a play and realizing you were never one of the actors, just a prop they were using. With a strange sense of finality, I blocked all 4 of their numbers. Then I turned off my phone and tried to find some peace in the silence. The next morning, a persistent knocking on the garage's side door woke me. It was Chloe. David, an absolute champion of a man, met her at the door, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, Chloe," he said, his large frame blocking the doorway. "Where is he, David?" "I know he's in there. His truck is parked right outside." Her voice was strained, high-pitched. David glanced at my truck, and then back at her, his expression unreadable. "Haven't seen him. Maybe he parked it here last night and got a ride somewhere. You know how it is." She didn't believe him for a second. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, alternating between pounding on the door and calling my phone, which, of course, went straight to a blocked number abyss. Eventually, she gave up, but not before shouting at the closed door, "This is so childish, Liam. You can't just run away from your responsibilities." My responsibilities? I had paid for my food, for my time at that table. My only other responsibility was to myself, a duty I had been neglecting for far too long. David came back into the office, a mug of black coffee in each hand. He passed one to me. "She's something else," he said, shaking his head. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "You know, man, I've been wanting to say something for years. Remember your birthday dinner last year? When Isabel made fun of your mom's accent? Or when Sophia called your sister's wedding charming for a low-budget affair?" I nodded, the memory surfacing, coated in the same film of shame and resignation I had felt last night. I had made excuses for them then, too. "You're a good man, Liam," David said, looking me in the eye. "You deserve someone who sees that, not someone who lets her friends use you as a doormat." He was right. The truth of it settled into my bones, heavy and solid. I had been making excuses for Chloe, for them, for 3 years, hoping that the woman I first fell for would eventually stand up and draw a line. But the line she drew was in the sand, and she had placed me firmly on the other side. Later that morning, I turned my phone back on. I had a slew of notifications, but also several missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. I decided to answer the next time it rang. It was Chloe, calling from her office line. "Liam, we need to talk," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Okay, talk," I replied, my tone even. "Not over the phone. Come home so we can discuss this like adults." "I'm fine where I am," I said. A sigh of exasperation crackled through the receiver. "You are being ridiculous. So, you got your feelings hurt. My friends were just being my friends. You embarrassed me in front of everyone and stuck me with an enormous bill. I paid for my meal, Chloe. You told me I could pay and leave, so I took your suggestion." "I didn't think you'd actually do it," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "Who does that?" "Someone who's tired of being disrespected," I said calmly. Her tactics shifted. The anger dissolved, replaced by a soft, pleading tone. "Baby, please. I'm sorry, okay? They went too far. I know that. Just come home, and we can talk it through. But, can you please send me the money for last night? I had to put the whole thing on my credit card, and Isabel is already freaking out about it." And there it was. The apology was just a bridge to get to the money. The core of the issue wasn't the disrespect, the humiliation, or the years of small cuts. It was the $650. "No," I said. "No? What do you mean no?" "I mean, you invited us out to celebrate your promotion. Your friends, your guests, spent the entire dinner insulting me while you sat there and let it happen. I am not paying for that experience. This is insane. You can't just..." I hung up the phone. She tried calling back from a few other numbers, but I ignored them. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. A few hours later, a text came in from another unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me open it. "Hey, this is Nathan, Maya's boyfriend. I heard about what happened at Ember and Ash. Just wanted to say, good for you, man. They've been talking down to you for years." Maya was complaining about it all last night, showed me the texts, and honestly, you did the right thing. They're all at your apartment right now, plotting some kind of revenge. Just thought you should have a heads up. Revenge? Revenge for what? For refusing to be their patron and their punching bag? The absurdity of it was almost laughable. I showed the text to David. He just shook his head and handed me the keys to his spare room. "Lay low here for a few days," he said. "We'll figure out the apartment situation later." The lease was in both our names, but I paid the larger share of the rent and all the utilities. It was a complication, another tangled thread in the mess. But as I sat in David's quiet guest room, I felt a sliver of peace. The anger was fading, replaced by a clarifying, cold resolve. What hurt the most wasn't the insults or the money. It was the realization that in 3 years, Chloe had never once truly stood up for me. Her loyalty wasn't to me or to us. It was to them. And that was a truth I could no longer unsee. The revenge, when it came, was not a dramatic, cinematic explosion, but a series of petty, spiteful acts that were far more revealing than any shouting match could have been. A few days later, needing to retrieve more of my clothes and, most importantly, some essential tools, I went to the apartment while I knew Chloe would be at work. Taped to our front door was an official-looking notice from the building management. A formal noise complaint. Apparently, The revenge plotting session with Isabel, Sophia, and Maya had gotten so loud that our downstairs neighbors had been forced to report it. A black mark on our rental history. Fantastic. The inside of the apartment was a disaster zone. Empty wine bottles and takeout containers littered the kitchen counters. It looked like the aftermath of a siege. A quick search confirmed my fears. My PlayStation was gone from the entertainment center. I eventually found it shoved in the back of Chloe's wardrobe, but what I discovered next sent a cold dread through my stomach. She had been in my workshop. My small, sacred space at the back of the apartment, where I kept my most valuable tools and current projects, had been violated. Several of my most prized hand tools were missing. My set of Japanese chisels, a gift from my late grandfather. My Lie-Nielsen low-angle block plane. My custom-made marking gauge. These weren't just tools, they were extensions of my hands, instruments I had spent years acquiring and learning to use with precision. A frantic search on social media confirmed my suspicion. A friend sent me screenshots from a local buy-and-sell group on Facebook. There they were, my tools, being sold by Chloe for fractions of their actual worth. Barely used hand tools, great for a hobbyist, the description read. Then my eyes fell upon the centerpiece of my current work, the project I had been pouring my heart into for months, a magnificent, 19th-century mahogany secretary desk. It was a wreck when I found it, but beneath the peeling veneer and broken legs, I saw its potential. I had been meticulously restoring it, piece by piece. The wood was beginning to glow again under my care. It was my masterpiece in progress. And she had listed it on a local classified site. Large antique desk. Needs some work. $500 OBO. Must go ASAP. The desk, even in its current state, was worth at least 5 times that. Fully restored, it would be priceless to the right collector. And it wasn't hers to sell. It was a client's commission. The cold dread solidified into a block of ice in my chest. This wasn't about money for the dinner anymore. This was a deliberate, malicious attempt to wound me in the one place I was most vulnerable, my craft, my passion, my very identity. I methodically took screenshots of everything, the Facebook listings, the classified ad. Then I called the Port Blossom Police non-emergency line. I explained the situation calmly, factually. The officer was sympathetic but explained that since we cohabitated and my name wasn't on the bill of sale for the desk, it was a complex civil matter. However, selling my personal tools without permission was theft. He advised me to file a formal report and to continue documenting everything. As I was taking photos of the empty spaces on my tool wall, my phone buzzed with a call from our landlord, Mr. Harrison. He was an older gentleman, fair and reasonable, who had always been good to me. "Liam, I need to talk to you," he said, his voice grave. "I just got off the phone with Chloe. She told me you've abandoned the apartment and she wants you taken off the lease. I also have to inform you about the official noise complaint from Monday night." I took a deep breath. "Mr. Harrison, I can assure you I have not abandoned anything. I've been staying with a friend for a few days because of a serious domestic issue. In fact, I'm standing in the apartment right now." "Is that so?" "She made it sound like you'd vanished weeks ago." I explained the situation, the dinner, the breakup, and the discovery of her selling my property. I could hear him sigh on the other end of the line. "Look, Liam," he said, his tone softening. "Between you and me, you've been the ideal tenant for 3 years. Never late with rent, never a single complaint until this week. If you want to take over the lease yourself, I'm open to discussing it." "What about Chloe?" I asked. "She would have to agree to be removed, or you'd both have to terminate the lease, which would involve penalties." "But Liam, I have to be frank. This noise complaint is a serious problem. Our building has a strict policy. One more, and I'll have grounds to begin eviction proceedings against both of you." An idea began to form in my mind. A path forward. After documenting everything, I called David. Within an hour, he was there with his truck. We carefully loaded the mahogany desk and the rest of my valuable tools and transported them to a secure garage for safekeeping. I packed my personal belongings, leaving behind anything we had purchased together. I took only what was mine before our lives had intertwined. That evening, Chloe came home to find me loading the last of my boxes into my own truck. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of shock and anger. She stood on the sidewalk, her work tote slung over her shoulder. "I'm moving my things to a safe location," I said, not looking at her. "Since you've decided they're yours to sell." "I needed the money," she shot back, her voice rising. "To pay for the dinner you walked out on." "So you stole from me. You stole from my client." "It's not stealing, Liam. We live together. It's our stuff." "That's not how anything works, Chloe," I said, finally turning to face her. Behind her, Isabel's sleek sedan pulled up to the curb. "Of course. Reinforcements." Chloe's expression shifted. "You're not seriously ending our 3-year relationship over one bad dinner, are you?" "It's not about one dinner, Chloe. It's about 3 years of you allowing your friends to disrespect me. It's about you telling me, to my face, that my choices were to endure it or leave. It's about you stealing from me the moment I took you at your word." Isabel got out of her car, her arms crossed. "Oh, good. The drama king is here. Liam, you owe Chloe $650. Just pay her so we can all move on." I ignored her and continued loading my truck. "I don't owe her anything." "Yes, you do," Isabel insisted. "You invited everyone out." "And I paid for my portion when I was explicitly told I could leave," I said, turning to face them both. "Which I did." Isabel looked at Chloe with an exasperated expression. "I told you he was too proud. These blue-collar types always have such fragile egos." A laugh escaped my lips. A real, genuine laugh. It felt like breaking a fever. "My ego is just fine," I said, slamming the truck's tailgate shut. "My boundaries are just finally where they should have been all along." Chloe's face crumpled. "Liam, please," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Let's just talk about this." "We are talking," I said, gently removing her hand. "And I'm telling you that I'm done. I'll handle the lease situation this week. I suggest you start looking for a new roommate. Maybe one of your friends, since they're all so successful and ambitious." "You're just throwing 3 years away," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "No," I replied, my voice soft but firm. "You did that. I'm just refusing to live in the wreckage anymore." I got in my truck and drove away, leaving them standing on the curb, 2 stunned figures in my rearview mirror. A profound weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted. Later that night, a voicemail appeared from a blocked number. It was Chloe. "You're right." "Okay. My friends were out of line." "I see that now. But you didn't have to be so cruel about it. Please, just come home. We can work this out. I love you." But the words felt hollow, a last, desperate attempt to regain control. It was too little, far too late. The foundation had crumbled, and no amount of regretful words could rebuild it. The final chapter of this saga unfolded not with a bang, but with the quiet, inevitable collapse of a structure built on a rotten foundation. The day after I moved my things out, I went to the police station and filed a formal report for the stolen tools, armed with my receipts and the screenshots of Chloe's online listings. The officer was thorough and professional, assuring me they would follow up with her. I then had a formal meeting with Mr. Harrison about the lease. Chloe, believing she held all the cards, initially refused to be removed from the lease agreement. She thought she could force my hand, perhaps force me to come back. What she failed to realize was that I was no longer playing her game. I presented Mr. Harrison with copies of the noise complaints. It turned out she had hosted another loud support session with her friends, resulting in a second official warning, and the police report number regarding the sale of another tenant's property from within the apartment. The building's lease had very specific clauses about illegal activities and creating disturbances. Mr. Harrison, now legally obligated to act, served her a cure or quit notice. She had 3 days to remedy the lease violations, which was impossible, as she had already sold the tools and the complaints were on record, or face formal eviction proceedings. Suddenly, she was very motivated to negotiate. She agreed to be removed from the lease, leaving me as the sole tenant. But the most beautiful and unexpected part of the resolution came from the implosion of her support system. Remember Nathan, Maya's now ex-boyfriend? He had, in fact, left her. He told me later that the final straw was her blatant mockery of his own career. He was a high school history teacher to her friends, calling him her pro bono boyfriend, until someone with a better portfolio came along. He packed his bags the same week I moved my things out. The dominoes began to fall in rapid succession. Without Nathan's steady income paying for half of everything, Maya could no longer afford her trendy, overpriced apartment. She attempted to move in with Chloe, but with the cure or quit notice in effect, having an unauthorized occupant would have resulted in immediate eviction for them both. Sophia's own relationship imploded when her boyfriend saw the texts she had sent me demanding money and calling me names. He saw a side of her, entitled, cruel, that he hadn't fully appreciated before. He told her he needed a break to reevaluate things. And Isabel, the ringleader, the self-proclaimed financial guru, was laid off from her job. It had nothing to do with our drama directly, but it was a fitting piece of cosmic irony. Her firm was downsizing, and her abrasive personality and tendency to spend work hours gossiping and scrolling through social media had made her an easy choice for the chopping block. Without their high-flying jobs and financially supportive partners, the venom they had so easily directed outward was turned on each other. I heard through the grapevine that Bianca blamed Chloe for ruining everything by dating beneath her station. Sophia accused Isabel of being a toxic influence. Isabel called them all ungrateful and parasitic. Their fierce, impenetrable bond was only strong when it had an external target. When forced to turn inward, it devoured itself. Meanwhile, I found a new place. A quiet one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, closer to a new, larger workshop space I was renting. The rent was cheaper, the light was better, and the air was filled with a sense of peace I hadn't realized I was missing. I poured my energy back into my work. The mahogany secretary desk, safe in my new shop, was nearly complete. Its grain shone with a deep, rich luster, more beautiful than I had even imagined. Yesterday, I received one last text from Chloe. She had moved back home with her parents an hour away. "I see now how toxic it all was," she wrote. "I was so insecure, so desperate for their approval that I threw away the only good thing I had. I should have defended you. I should have been on your team. I am so sorry, Liam. Is there any chance we could just talk?" I read the message, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity. But I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. My silence was the only honest answer I had left. Last weekend, David helped me move the last of my things into my new workshop. As we set down a heavy box of clamps, he looked around at the bright, airy space, at the nearly finished desk standing proudly in the center, and he smiled. "You know," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, "you didn't just dodge a bullet, man. You dodged a whole firing squad." He was right. And the best part? I ran into Nathan at a coffee shop last week. We got to talking, comparing notes on our eerily similar experiences. It turned out we had a lot in common, a shared love for history, for quiet pursuits, for a life built on substance rather than style. We made plans to go to a museum exhibit this weekend. My mother called me last night just to check in. "You sound different, Liam," she said, her voice warm. "You sound happier than you have in years." She was right. I am. It's funny how much lighter you feel when you finally stop carrying the weight of people who don't respect you. They had wanted me to pay for their dinner, for their celebration. In the end, they're all paying a price, just not in the way they ever expected. And me? I feel like I've finally been given a refund for 3 years of my life, with interest. The future feels like a beautiful, unworked piece of wood, full of potential, waiting for my own 2 hands to shape it.